The last few weeks we've been talking about how you measure your life. And the weeks before that we talked a little about running the race toward a closer relationship with God. We talked about how to prepare for the race, how to get set, and then about going. So the next couple weeks we talked about how you will measure your life. How do you measure where you are in this journey toward a better relationship with God? And we had a big old stick, and we talked about 3 or 4 different ways to measure our life. Today we're going to look at those a little closer. If you have a worship guide, that yellow piece of paper, and I hope you picked it up on your way in, I invite you to take a note or two, because we believe that God has something to say to you today.
Thank you.
If you want to write it down, that'd be great. So our journey has several steps. Week 1, we talked about love. And how we're measured by who we love and how we love them. And you remember that love is a verb, not a feeling. It's an action. And last week we talked about giving. That we measure our life by how and what we give. That we are measured by what we give, not by what we get. Not by how much we have, but by how much we give away. And I would suggest to you that give is a verb also. And today we're talking about measuring our life by how and who we serve. And you've probably noticed, serve is a verb too. How we love, how we give, how and who we serve. We're talking about our motivation for these things, because God knows your heart. We can be the nicest person in the world. We can have the most emotional reaction to all kinds of things. We can confuse love with like. And we can give what's left over. And we can do things for other people, but we can be the nicest, most giving person in the world, and if our motivation isn't right, God sees our heart. We can be, doing all these things and checking them off our list, our do-good checklist. And including in that might be, being last in line at the Methodist potluck, because we know there's always going to be plenty when we get there. Jesus had something to say about doing good just for the sake of doing good. He says it in Matthew 23, verses 1 through 7, and then 11 and 12. Now Jesus is talking to his disciples, along with a crowd that had gathered. The religion scholars and the church folk, the Pharisees, are competent teachers in God's law, he says. You won't go wrong in following them on the teachings of Moses. But be careful about following them. You can't go wrong following the teachings, but be careful about following them. They talk a good line, but they don't live it. They don't take it into their hearts and live it out in their behavior. It's all spit and polish veneer. It's a very thin layer of looking good for the wrong reason. Instead of giving you God's law as food and drink by which you can banquet on God, They package it in bundles of rules, loading you down like pack animals. They seem to take pleasure in watching you stagger under these loads and wouldn't think of lifting a finger to help you. Their lives are perpetual fashion shows, embroidered prayer shawls one day and flowery prayers the next. They love to sit at the head table at church dinners, basking in the most prominent positions, preening in the radiance of public flattery, receiving honorary degrees and getting called doctor and reverend. Do you want to stand out? Then step down. Be a servant. If you puff yourself up, you'll get the wind knocked out of you. But if you're content to simply be yourself, your life will count for plenty. If you're content to be yourself.
We're born self-centered. So leaving that behind takes practice. You can't wait till you feel like it. It's not about feelings, it's about action. Doesn't happen overnight. You just need to do it. You need to start doing it. Piece of advice we gave a couple weeks ago to help us get into the correct motivation was fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it. If you're not really feeling it, do it anyway. It will become a habit. It will become part of you. See, if I love, I give. If I give, I serve. If I give and serve, I love. They're not sequential. They're all at once. Jesus didn't just talk about being a servant leader. Jesus modeled it. He took the lowest job and he made it holy. In the Gospel of John, we find a extra description for that Thursday night when Jesus was betrayed. We don't find this in the other three Gospels. We find the Lord's Supper in all four. But in John, Jesus, to make a point to his disciples, did this. Jesus knew that the Father had put him in complete charge of everything. I'm in John 13. Jesus knew that the Father had put him in complete charge of everything. That he came from God and was going back to God. So he got up from the supper table, set aside his robe, and put on an apron. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the feet, the smelly, dirty, calloused feet of his disciples, drying them with his apron. And he said to them after he had finished, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You address me as teacher and master, and rightly so. That is what I am. So if I, the master and teacher, wash your feet, you must now wash each other's feet. I've laid down a pattern for you. What I've done, you do. I'm only pointing out the obvious. A servant is not ranked above his master. An employee doesn't give orders to the employer. If you understand what I'm telling you, act like it. and live a blessed life. Jesus just turns the tables on the world's idea of leadership and service. A servant is not ranked above his master, yet he came to serve us. Someone said, Jesus received what we deserved so that we could receive what he deserves. Take the job no one else wants, and then do it in secret. Take the job no one else wants, but not to show off. I used to joke that I'm proud of my humility. Take the job no one else wants, but do it in secret. That's serving. That's greatness in God's kingdom. We all have that. We're born with it. We're born with that selfishness. So we not only have to ask each other or ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? We have to ask ourselves, what would love do? What would love do? And you know, Paul talked about everything, and he talked about love quite a bit. And he also talked about freedom. This is from Paul's letter to the Galatians. In chapter 5, he said, "It is absolutely clear that God has called you to a free life. Just make sure that you don't use this freedom as an excuse to do whatever you want to do and destroy your freedom. Rather, use your freedom to serve one another in love." Just the opposite of what we think, isn't it? I'm free to do whatever I want. You are. But you'll destroy that freedom if you serve yourself. Rather, use your freedom to serve one another in love. That's how freedom grows. For everything we know about God's Word is summed up in a single sentence. Love others as you love yourself. That's an act of true freedom. If you bite and ravage each other, watch out. In no time at all, you'll be annihilating each other, and where will your precious freedom be then? My counsel is this: live freely, animated and motivated by God's Spirit. Then you won't feed the compulsions of selfishness. For there is a root of sinful self-interest in us that is at odds with the free spirit. Just as a free spirit is incompatible with selfishness. These two ways of life are antithetical, so that you cannot live at times one day one way, and at times another way according to how you feel on any given day. Fake it till you make it. Why don't you choose to be led by the Spirit and so escape the erratic compulsions of a law-dominated existence?
We're reading out of the Message, and it makes it very clear, lest we miss exactly what's being said here. It is obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. It is obvious about what kind of life develops when you try to get your own way all the time. And these are the examples. Repetitive, loveless, cheap sex. A stinking accumulation of mental and emotional garbage. When you try to get your way all the time. Frenzied and joyless grabs for happiness. trinket gods, magic show religion. It's obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. Paranoid loneliness, cutthroat competition, all-consuming yet never satisfied wants, a brutal temper, the inability to love or be loved, divided homes and divided lives. It's obvious what kind of life develops out of trying to get your own way all the time. Small-minded and lopsided pursuits, the vicious habit of depersonalizing everyone into a rival, uncontrolled and uncontrollable addictions, ugly parodies of community. And he says, I could go on. That's probably enough. This isn't the first time I have warned you. If you use your freedom this way, you will not inherit God's kingdom.
Now in contrast, Paul was big on these contrasts. See if this doesn't sound like a better life to you. What happens when we live God's way? He brings gifts into our lives, much the same way that fruit appears in an orchard. Things like affection for others, exuberance about life, serenity. We develop a willingness to stick with things, a sense of compassion in the heart, and a conviction that a basic holiness permeates things and people. We find ourselves involved in loyal commitments, not needing to force our way in life, able to marshal and direct our energies wisely. You could have summed that up with a word: shalom. Legalism is helpless in bringing this about. It only gets in the way. Among those who belong to Christ, everything connected with getting our own way and mindlessly responding to what everyone else calls necessities is killed off for good, crucified on Christ's cross.
Since this is the kind of life we've chosen, the life of the Spirit, let us make sure that we just do not hold it as an idea in our head or a sentiment in our heart. We can't just hold it as an idea in our head or a sentiment in our heart.
Remember that on Valentine's Day.
Love is not an idea in our head or a sentiment in our heart.
It's a verb.
Work out its implications. Work out its implications in every detail of your life. That means we will not compare ourselves with each other as if one were better and another worse. We have far more interesting things to do with our lives. Each of us is an original. So what do we do with that? What do we do with all of that? How do we react? What's the take home? Well, think about Matthew 25, the story at the end, where all the nations, which is all the people, are gathered before Jesus. And if you believe this book, that's what it says will happen. And we will be sorted out, the sheep and the goats. And those who are rewarded, remember, are astonished. Why am I being rewarded? I just lived. I just lived like this. Love, give, serve. I just lived my whole life like that. I didn't do anything special. Why am I being rewarded? And the ones who are not rewarded, the ones who are set aside, the goats, they say, "What? I didn't see you. When did I ever see you, Jesus, hungry or thirsty or naked?" And do you remember what Jesus said? Whenever you didn't do it to someone who was ignored or left out, you didn't do it for me. So if I'm living like this, God knows our motivation and our attitude and our action. And if I'm living a life of love that leads to giving, that lives to service, that leads to love, that leads to giving, that leads to service, I am worshiping all the time. And I am praying without ceasing. My life becomes prayer and worship.
Though I may speak with bravest fire, and have the gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain, as sounding brass, and hopeless gain. Though I may give all I possess, and striving so my love profess, but not be given by love within, the prophet soon turns strangely thin.
Come, Spirit, come. Our hearts control. Our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are free.
Amen.